You're a young mother in 1453 Constantinople. The great walls that have kept your city safe for over 1,000 years are falling apart because of Ottoman cannons. Your husband died protecting the walls 3 days ago. Now Turkish soldiers are breaking down your door, and you're holding your baby daughter, knowing that what happens next will be worse than his death. For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire took over lands on 3 continents. From the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Yemen, we remember them for beautiful buildings like the Blue Mosque, for smart war plans, and for sultans who changed history. But there's another side to how the Ottomans took over new lands that historians have mostly hidden away in old papers. They had a planned system for taking over that used the most personal parts of human life as a weapon. Before we continue, if you find this type of forgotten history interesting, think about subscribing and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps us make more videos like this. Now let's look at what really happened when Ottoman forces won battles. The moment an Ottoman army broke through enemy walls, a carefully planned process started that had nothing to do with war needs and everything to do with planned harm. This wasn't chaos or wild violence from battle. This was a plan done with organized care across hundreds of captured cities and towns. When Constantinople finally fell on May 29, 1453, Sultan Mehmed's forces didn't just steal things and leave. They used what Ottoman war books called the harvesting protocol. People who lived in Byzantine at the time describe scenes that sound like nightmares. But Ottoman records treat these same events as normal office work. The protocol was terribly efficient. Adult males over 12 were killed in organized groups, not during battle, but in organized groups after giving up. This wasn't about getting rid of soldiers. Boys as young as 6 were also killed if they seemed like they might fight back someday. The Ottomans had learned that leaving male survivors, even children, created future problems. But death was only for males. Women and young girls faced something far worse. Ottoman military law, written down in papers that still exist in Turkish libraries today, set up clear steps for what they called population processing. Women were right away separated into groups based on age, how healthy they were, and how valuable they seemed. The sorting happened in public squares, often in front of burning churches or destroyed public buildings, making sure it had the biggest effect on both victims and anyone left in the city. Young women between about 14 and 25 made up the most valuable group. Ottoman records from the Constantinople capture list 4,200 women in this group, each given a number and estimated price. These weren't just numbers, they were real people reduced to items on lists that treated them like farm animals. The second group included women between 25 and 40, thought good enough for hard work, but past their best years for other purposes. The third group, women over 40, were killed right away along with the men, thought too old to be worth the cost of feeding and moving. Children presented a special chance. Boys under 6 were taken for the Devshirme system, the empire's organized program of changing culture and religion. But girls under 12 entered what Ottoman papers carefully called formation programs, designed to prepare them for specific jobs within the empire. The mental warfare built into these steps was as carefully planned as any war campaign. Families were forced to watch the sorting process, mothers seeing daughters put into different groups, knowing they would never see them again. The Ottomans understood that this mental pain would spread throughout remaining people, making future fighting less likely. Stories from that time describe how Ottoman soldiers would purposely separate mothers from baby children, not for practical reasons, but to cause the most emotional pain. Crying babies were often killed right away, not to be cruel to the babies, but to show complete power over their mothers. The message was clear. Fighting back meant watching your children die. How big what happened in Constantinople was gives us a pattern for understanding Ottoman conquest across their empire. Within 48 hours of the city's fall, about 50,000 people had been sorted through these groups. 12,000 women and girls were loaded onto ships going to slave markets in Bursa, Ankara, and other Ottoman cities. Another 8,000 were given out among the winning army as personal property. But the organized nature of Ottoman practices becomes truly horrifying when we look at their record-keeping methods. The empire kept detailed records because these weren't sudden war crimes. They were planned money-making activities that needed careful counting. Ship lists from that time put human cargo next to silk, spices, and valuable metals. A typical entry might read, 20 rolls of Damascus silk, 40 bags of pepper, 15 females aged 16 to 20 years, excellent condition. The women weren't even given the respective names in these papers, just ages, how they looked, and estimated prices. The money-making system supporting this stretched across the entire Ottoman Empire. Special markets in major cities had sections just for human trafficking with set pricing that went up and down based on supply and demand. A young Greek or Serbian woman might sell for 20 to 30 silver pieces in Istanbul markets, while African women brought different prices depending on where they came from and how they looked. The Ottomans didn't invent slavery, but they made it work like a factory in ways that earlier empires had never done. They created standard steps for capture, moving, and selling that worked with the efficiency of modern companies. Sales receipts, moving papers, and market lists survive in Ottoman libraries, recording human suffering with the same attention to detail used for any other business. Perhaps most disturbing was how this system created its own momentum. Success in Ottoman military campaigns was measured not just in land taken over, but in people captured. Commanders got bonuses based on the number and quality of prisoners taken. This created reasons for targeting regular people rather than just soldiers. The effect on surviving people's minds was exactly what Ottoman planners wanted. Villages and cities that saw these processing steps often gave up without fighting when Ottoman armies appeared. The empire's reputation for organized cruelty became a weapon more powerful than cannons or horse soldiers. Women who survived the first sorting faced trips to different places throughout the empire, each carrying its own specific horrors. Those going to slave markets traveled in specially built ships with cargo areas designed for carrying people. Sea archaeology shows ventilation systems, water storage, and waste management designed to keep human cargo alive during weeks-long trips. The ships were floating prisons, but they were also places for organized taking away of humanity. Women had their clothing, names, and any personal things that might remind them of their old lives taken away. They were given numbers and basic clothes that marked them as property. The process was designed to break mental resistance before they reached their final places. Ottoman records show death rates during moving averaged around 15%, thought of as acceptable losses by managers who viewed human cargo through purely money calculations. Women who died during moving were simply thrown overboard, their deaths recorded in books alongside spoiled grain or damaged goods. The empire's approach to conquered women shows a level of organized planning that challenges everything we think we know about medieval warfare. This wasn't mindless cruelty or cultural misunderstanding. This was on-purpose policy used across centuries and continents designed to turn human beings into products, while at the same time scaring entire populations into giving up. But the true horror wasn't just in what happened during conquest. It was in what came afterward, when the organized harm of women became the foundation of Ottoman Empire management. The empire's legal system turned rape into marriage, murder into justice, and slavery into God's will. Ottoman legal codes kept in libraries across Turkey spell out steps that made legal every form of sexual violence imaginable. These weren't mistakes or violations of law. They were the law. The idea of war wives became central to Ottoman expansion strategy. When a warrior died in battle against Ottoman forces, his widow automatically became property of whoever killed him. This wasn't informal tradition. It was written legal teaching with specific steps for claiming ownership. The claiming process needed 3 witnesses and had to happen within 72 hours of the husband's death. After that time, other warriors could challenge ownership, leading to fights over women like arguments over farm animals. Ottoman military courts kept detailed records of these ownership battles, treating them as standard property arguments. But legal ownership was just the beginning. The change of conquered women into war wives required organized destruction of their previous identities. Names were changed right away, often to Turkish versions that had no connection to their birth names. Religious conversion was required, forced through steps that combined mental torture with religious teaching. The conversion process involved public ceremonies where women were forced to speak against their previous faith, often required to spit on religious symbols or burn sacred texts from their former lives. Those who refused faced increasing punishments designed to break resistance without reducing their selling value. The empire kept conversion centers in major cities, buildings designed specifically for processing conquered women. Digging at sites in Bursa and Edirne have found building foundations with special rooms, drainage systems, and restraint tools that paint a picture of factory-scale mental warfare. These centers worked for decades, processing thousands of women through standard programs designed to erase cultural memory and replace it with complete obedience. The programs typically lasted 6 months, long enough to ensure pregnancy from organized rape, creating biological bonds that made escape mentally impossible. Children born from these forced unions faced their own organized harm. Mixed-blood children were often killed right away if they showed signs of looking too much like their mothers, seen as inconvenient proof of the rape that created them. Survivors were raised to serve the empire, never knowing their mothers' real names or original cultures. The mental warfare extended beyond individual victims to entire populations. The Ottomans purposely spread the word about their treatment of conquered women, spreading detailed stories through territories they planned to invade. The reputation for organized sexual violence became a weapon of conquest, more effective than any military technology. Villages would give up without fighting, rather than subject their women to documented Ottoman steppes. The empire's own story writers wrote proudly of cities that gave up right away upon hearing what had happened to women in previously conquered territories. Fear became their most effective military tool, but giving up offered no protection. The Ottomans had learned that scared populations were easier to control than grateful ones. Even cities that gave up voluntarily often found their women subjected to the same organized harm, justified as necessary for empire security. The tribute system made this harm official on a massive scale. The famous Devshirme levy that took boys also included organized collection of girls, though this part gets far less attention in history. Young girls were taken from Christian families under the same legal system used for boys, but where they went and how they were treated was dramatically different. While boys might eventually rise to powerful positions within Ottoman management, girls disappeared into systems designed for sexual harm and reproductive slavery. Ottoman records show that about 40% of girls taken in tribute levies died within their first year of captivity, victims of organized abuse that their captors documented with office-like precision. The survivors faced lives of controlled breeding, managed like farm animals to produce children for the empire. These breeding programs worked in buildings across Ottoman territory, with detailed records tracking pregnancy rates, infant death, and the productive lifespan of female captives. The empire's approach to female captives shows mathematical calculations of human suffering that are hard to understand. Ottoman managers calculated the best age for capturing girls, the most efficient methods for breaking mental resistance, and the exact balance between harm and survival, necessary to maintain productive breeding populations. These calculations appear in management papers that treat human suffering as engineering problems needing technical solutions. The cold precision of these records, their matter-of-fact discussion of torture and rape, provides insight into how organized taking away of humanity became normal within empire culture. The money reasons driving this system created a feedback loop that got stronger over time. Military commanders who captured valuable women got promotions and bonuses. Slave traders who supplied high-quality females gained special treatment in empire contracts. The empire's entire military and management structure developed around the organized harm of conquered populations. This wasn't limited to battlefield captures. Ottoman forces did regular raids into neighboring territories, specifically to get women and children for empire use. These raids followed seasonal patterns, timed to get the most captures while minimizing military risk. Entire communities lived in constant fear of harvest time raids that could destroy families overnight. The raids were planned with military precision, using spy networks that identified the most valuable targets. Ottoman scouts would spend months mapping villages, identifying the most attractive women and healthiest children, planning routes that got the most captures while avoiding military fights. The mental impact of living under constant threat of kidnapping shaped entire cultures. Parents would purposely scar their daughters' faces or break their limbs to make them less desirable to Ottoman raiders. The empire had created societies where loving families felt forced to hurt their own children to protect them from worse fates. Some communities developed detailed hiding systems, underground rooms and forest shelters, where women and children could hide during raid seasons. But the Ottomans adapted their tactics, using torture to force villages to reveal hiding places, turning survival plans into death traps. The empire's organized approach to sexual violence created cultural changes that lasted long after Ottoman power declined. Entire regions developed traditions and customs designed around protecting women from capture, social structures that assumed constant threat of kidnapping and organized rape. These cultural changes provide proof of the scale and persistence of Ottoman practices. When entire societies reorganized themselves around protecting women from organized sexual violence, that violence has become a defining feature of their existence. The records of these practices exist because the Ottomans saw nothing shameful in their actions. They recorded their steps with the same attention to detail they brought to tax collection or military planning, keeping proof of organized cruelty that worked across centuries. The empire's record-keeping shows something even more disturbing than individual terrible acts. They kept breeding registers, detailed logs tracking the reproductive ability of enslaved women across their territories. These weren't simple counts, but complicated databases that watched pregnancy cycles, birth outcomes, and the long-term productivity of what they called their human livestock. Women who survived capture and moving found themselves given identification numbers and housed in buildings designed for maximum reproductive efficiency. Ottoman architects developed standard building plans for these centers, structures that appeared throughout the empire with identical layouts designed for controlling and watching female captives. The buildings had small individual cells connected by hallways that allowed guards to watch every movement. Central courtyards provided controlled exercise areas where women could maintain physical health necessary for childbearing. Special medical areas made sure that pregnancies went successfully, not out of concern for the women, but to protect empire investments. Medical records from these buildings survive in Ottoman libraries, recording steps that treated women like breeding animals. Doctors employed by the empire developed techniques for getting the most pregnancies and reducing infant death, innovations that served purely money rather than humanitarian purposes. The empire's approach to managing these populations shows factory-level organization. Women were sorted by age, physical condition, and reproductive history. Those thought most valuable for breeding got better food and medical care. Older women, or those who failed to produce children, faced transfer to manual labor buildings where conditions were purposely harsh. The mental manipulation used in these centers was as organized as the physical control. Women were told their families were dead, shown fake proof of their home villages being destroyed. The goal was to eliminate hope of rescue or return, making resistance seem pointless. Ottoman managers discovered that women who believed their previous lives had been completely erased were more obedient and less likely to try to escape. The empire spent significant resources on creating and keeping these mental lies, understanding that mental control was more effective than physical restraints. The children born in these buildings faced pre-decided fates based on gender and physical characteristics. Boys showing promise were often brought into Ottoman military or management systems after being separated from their mothers at age 5 or 6. Girls were judged for their potential as future breeding stock or house servants. The separation process was designed to be traumatic for mothers, serving both practical and mental purposes. Women who lost children to empire systems became more dependent on their captors for emotional support, a calculated strategy that reduced escape attempts and rebellion. These organized separations created generations of people who never knew their true origins or family connections. The empire purposely destroyed family bonds to prevent the formation of resistance networks and ensure complete loyalty to Ottoman systems. The Ottoman Empire's organized harm of conquered women wasn't a strange part of medieval warfare. It was a planned strategy that worked for over 6 centuries, recorded in the empire's own records, with office-like precision. These practices shaped the lives of millions, created cultural pain that lasted for generations, and remind us how quickly civilized societies can make the unthinkable normal when power goes unchecked. The records are there, waiting for historians willing to face this uncomfortable truth.